panel lined up for you today, and our topic is practical and pedagogical ways to assess your students online. I'm Orna Farrell. I'm going to moderate the session with my colleague Vlad Mihescu. Sorry, Vlad, if I've butchered your name. So please go ahead and say hello in the chat as we're coming in. We're expecting quite a large group this morning, so we might just give everyone a few moments to join. And do say hello and tell us where you are. And even better, tell us what the weather is like, because I always like weather information. So we have a brilliant panel for you this morning. First of all, we're going to hear from Suzanne Stone and Rob Lowney from Dublin City University, and they're going to share a brilliant resource that they've been involved with the creation of. It's a lovely crowdsourced resource on alternative assessment. And then we have the fab team from Eportfolio Ireland, a community of practice who obviously like Eportfolio. Tom Farrelly and Karen Buckley will be joining us from Eportfolio Ireland. And then last but not least, James Brunton is going to share his experience of open pedagogy assignments within an online psychology program based in DCU Connected. So fantastic group. I see about 90 attendees in so far. So I'm gonna crack on now in just 1 second. Rainy Lithuania. Oh, that's disappointing on that now. So during the session, guys, feel free to interact in the chat. If you like, you can also put questions in the Q&A box or questions in the chat. And we will have time at the end to answer and chat about the questions, but also we'll have a brief pause after each presentation to take a few questions. So you should have lots of time to ask questions to the panelists and find out a bit more. If there's relevant links or any resources you think would be useful to share, please go ahead and pop them in the chat. And we'll also do the same with the presenters' slides and any resources that come up as we go along. So without further ado, I'm gonna introduce Rob and Suzanne from Dublin City University. So Rob Lowney is a learning technologist in the Teaching Enhancement Unit. He works with academic staff to enhance the teaching, learning, assessment practices on their modules with digital technologies. Rob has a particular interest in empowering academic staff to implement technology-enhanced assessment. Other areas he's interested in are flipped learning, mobile devices in education, learning analytics, and reusable learning objects. And then Suzanne Stone is also a learning technologist in the Teaching Enhancement Unit in Dublin City University. Suzanne has been involved in research relating to educational technologies over a number of years, including projects on a drop-in approach to professional development for Moodle, the development of a vocabulary assessment tool, student engagement in live online classrooms like this, the use of social media applications as back channels. Suzanne holds an MSc in Education and Training from DCU and is currently engaging in a professional doctorate in digital learning. So over to you, Suzanne and Rob.
Thank you very much, Orna and Vlad and all the rest of the team for inviting us here and for that lovely introduction. As you said, my name is Rob from DCU, and my colleague Suzanne is here as well. And we're going to take you through the first presentation here in this webinar. We'll divide it up half and half. So I'll go first and then I'll hand you over to Suzanne. So first of all, what we'd like to do is give you a little bit of background to the development of this open education resource on assessment exemplars and where it came from, where it's sprung from. Then we'll take you through the rationale for creating the OER, the process that we used to crowdsource the entries in the OER, and then we will round it off by giving you access to the OER itself. So this all kind of started with the Enhancing Digital Teaching and Learning project, which is a 3-year nationally funded project funded by the Higher Education Authority in Ireland and coordinated by the Irish Universities Association, which is the representative body of the 7 public Irish universities. And This came to being, I suppose, because as we all know, in recent years, there's been a lot of attention given to the need for academic staff to develop digital skills and competences, to embed digital teaching, learning and assessment in their curriculums and in their modules, so as to improve the digital learning experience of students. And the IUA capitalized on this and received funding from the HEA to put together this project to achieve that particular aim, which is ultimately to enhance the digital attributes and the digital educational experience of our university students in Ireland. And that aim is also complemented by developing and implementing a staff development program to help improve the digital skills and competences of all those who teach in Irish universities. And we particularly use the term all those who teach. We don't just focus on, you know, full professors or assistant professors or anything like that, but we take a very broad approach to treating people who teach and people who support teaching. The project largely is centered around campus-based instructors and helping them develop their digital skills in teaching and learning. And even though the project itself, the title is about digital teaching and learning, really it's about digital education as a whole, and it covers digital learning design of programs, curriculums and modules. It covers teaching and learning, obviously. It also covers assessment, which is a particular area that myself and Suzanne are interested in at DCU. I see Sharon Flynn is here as one of the attendees. Sharon is the project manager within the IUA. So please, Sharon, do jump into the chat if you have any other contributions you'd like to make. The approach is ultimately to mainstream digital teaching and learning in Irish universities by addressing the professional development of all those who teach. We wanted to, a lot of us would be very familiar with this concept of champions, or, you know, the one or two lecturers or professors in a department who are very, very skilled when it comes to digital teaching and learning. And they're the go-to people whenever anything digital takes place in teaching and learning. And I suppose the approach of this project is to move away from that idea of champions, but really to help mainstream digital in all that we do in university teaching and learning, and to help mainstream everybody's skills in universities. The project is underpinned by 4 pillars. The first one is this concept of not starting from zero, because we are aware that professional development, training, non-formal learning in this space takes place in all our institutions. Many institutions have accredited programs or accredited modules, or offer suites of workshops or mentorship or occupational training, etc. And this project certainly doesn't aim to come in and replace all that, but really build on what the activities that are happening in the 7 universities. We very much think about pedagogy first. We don't come in with a suite of tools and say you need to use these digital tools for assessment and learning and teaching, but we talk about the why and we talk about the rationale first, and the technology comes later. We operate on a discipline basis, so we work with teams of lecturers who are grouped together because they work on a particular program, or they're all part of a particular department or a particular discipline. We don't work with kind of ad hoc lecturers, or we don't work with a mishmash of lecturers from across the institution. We're very much discipline focused and working with teams to help build up their skills and competences. And the student voice is very important to us. We have students involved in the project at the steering group level. We ourselves, myself and Suzanne, have good relationships with the students' union and student leaders in DCU, and I'll come back to a new development we have as well around the student voice, which has been particularly useful and exciting in recent times. All that we do is aligned to the Digicomp EDU framework, which I'm sure most people here are familiar with. So all of our activities are linked to areas or to competencies on this framework, so that the staff who are participating in the professional development activities have some sort of understanding or some sort of map of where their skills fit in the grand scheme of things, and where they could potentially go to develop their skills further. So that's quite an important feature of the project as well. As I mentioned, the project is across the 7 Irish universities. We have a steering group made up of a number of members of senior management from the 7 universities, and we found that that's quite important to have their buy-in and their support with this 3-year project, because that will go a long way to having some long-term impact with the support of senior management. I mentioned Dr. Sharon Flynn, who's here attending the webinar today. She is the project manager, the wonderful project manager in the IUA, who coordinates the activities and keeps us on track and keeps a bird's eye view of how the project is running in the 7 universities. And then within the 7 universities, there are project teams. So myself and Suzanne are the project co-leads in DCU, and we have 6 counterparts in the other universities as well. We do have a student intern, Rory O'Gallagher, who works with Sharon in the IUA. And recently we have also recruited a number of interns within each of the 7 universities, and we're blessed to have a wonderful intern, Laura Ann Scanlon, who came on board in recent months with myself and Suzanne to bring the student perspective and the student voice around all things digital teaching and learning. We conducted pilots in the last academic year in each of the universities. Again, you know, taking the approach that we're not starting from zero. We were aware that there were activities in all of the 7 universities, and it just didn't make sense for one kind of super approach to come in on top and be bedded in from the top down. This is really a bottom-up approach to developing digital skills and competences. So even though we all ran a pilot in the 7 universities, the pilots were all very, very different, as you can see on screen there. And we in DCU decided to focus on the area of assessment. So we wanted to build lecturer skills in digital assessment through things like structured workshops, training, consultation, guidance, and so on. And Suzanne will delve into that a bit deeper shortly. How our project maps with the underlying principle, or how our project in DCU aligns to the overall pillars of the national project are that we in the Teaching Enhancement Unit, the TEU in DCU, run a number of different professional development activities on an ongoing basis in a number of different areas. So therefore, when we started our EDTL project in DCU, we didn't again start from zero, but we looked at what existing offerings we had in DCU and where we could take those and adapt those and build on those and bring in new offerings and bring in new workshops and so on. We very much focus with our staff around why to use technology in assessment, or we look at why to use a particular assessment approach and what's the benefit of that and what are the pros and what are the cons, etc. And then we very much look at the how-to later. So a lot of our workshops, for example, would be very discussion-based and teasing out assessment issues with staff and teasing out how technology can possibly help. And then we would usually follow up later with maybe some technical support and technical guidance. Our workshops are nearly, even though we have a suite of workshops available, they're nearly always tailored in one way or another to a particular discipline. So if we're working with the School of Languages, or if we're working with the business school, they might be interested in broadly the same topics and workshops, but they'll always be tailored specifically to them. As I mentioned, we have our intern Laura Ann, who's wonderful in DCU. We have good relations with the Students' Union, and their voice and perspective is important on this project. And we also run focus groups with students to hear from them as to their digital experience and their digital attributes during their time of study in DCU, because again, ultimately the aim of the project is to improve the student digital learning experience. So we're quite conscious of that. I'm going to hand you over to Suzanne now, if that's okay. So I will stop sharing my screen and I'll let Suzanne jump in now and share hers.
That's brilliant, Rob. Thanks so much. So continuing on that conversation, just to talk a little bit about why we decided to focus on technology enhanced assessment. I guess the research and the literature show that students are very much focused on assessment, and that's why we took the approach of tackling assessment head on, because it has an influence on teaching and learning in all its facets. So that's why we chose assessment. Our project is built around 4 work packages. centered around a staff development program. And Rob spoke a little bit about our approach to that program. But one of the 4 work packages, and you see all 4 of them there, is the development and maintenance of online resources. And that's what we're going to talk to you about today in terms of this open educational resource. So as we piloted the EODLW project at DCU, we realized that we had a need for an open education resource or an online resource of some kind. We didn't immediately think that it would be open, but we needed a resource to support staff to imagine alternative types of assessment. We found that many academics were wedded to that traditional form of assessment, whether it be an assignment or even, say, from a technical point of view, an online quiz. We wanted to move beyond that and give them some ideas around the types of assessment that they might consider, which would be supported by technology. And actually, we did find some resources online and through the literature, but we decided that we needed some more, because I guess we're working from a discipline-specific point of view, and in many cases, for example, in kind of the humanities, there weren't a lot of exemplars or case studies available to us. So that's where the kind of the idea for the open education resource was born. And why did we take a crowdsourcing approach? Well, we felt that there's a very rich community around technology enhanced learning, and we felt that it was wise to draw on the community knowledge and experience. And then why take an open education resource approach? Why take an open approach? Well, it aligns with the Teaching Enhancement Unit open practice. Teaching Enhancement Unit is the unit at Dublin City University where myself and Rob are based, but it also aligns with our own personal philosophies of education. And also leaving the resource open allows for continuing development and a building of the resource over time. So that's why we decided on the open education and the crowdsourcing approach. Just to speak to you a little bit about that crowdsourcing approach, we obviously we hadn't intended for it to all happen online, but obviously events conspired in March, and that's how we have developed the resource. We started at the Alt Winter Conference last December, so that was before the COVID, but we had intended that this would be something that we would present at conferences and that we would do in a face-to-face context as well. But we have, in fact, developed it online since last December. And it's building nicely. We have 30 exemplars in our resource now. But I guess one of the difficulties of co-creating a resource online is in our first outing, we realized that we needed to kind of counteract that silence. It can be quite an unnerving experience for the presenters or the facilitators, for people to have a session where people are working independently, because it can be quite silent and you can feel quite alone. So our approach was to take a kind of a relaxed and fun approach. We had some music playing in the background. We had some spot prizes, which went down very well. And then other kind of pointers, if people are considering this approach, there is a level of scaffolding required. We scaffolded it through discussing what we were seeing people work on throughout the session. We didn't pressurize people to contribute or to create an exemplar on the spot. Participants were invited to browse if they wish, so that kind of took the pressure off people. And then because it was, every time that we've developed this resource in an online session, they've been short enough sessions, so sometimes people need to go away and think about the exemplar or the case study that they've contributed to the document. So we've left the document open for a couple of weeks after each event so that people can go back and edit if they wish. So again, that takes the pressure off to contribute very quickly on the day. We also invited contributors to discuss their case study in the webinar, but again, in a kind of a very nurturing fashion, no pressure, and we've kept the atmosphere extremely relaxed throughout all of the sessions. Just to introduce you then to the resource itself, it's available here. We'll pop that into the chat box, and I think we're sharing the slides after this session in any case, so it'll be included in that in the slides as well. So we've published a couple of times. We published earlier in the year the first version of the resource, and we've published again just this week a second iteration of the Open Education resource. And what we're going to do is leave that as it is for the moment, and then later on, maybe next year in the spring at some point, we'll open it up again for contributions. But at the moment, this is our published resource. And I just want to open it up and just show you very briefly one example. Can you see that case study, Orna? You might nod, or Rob. Brilliant, thank you. Excellent. So you'll see there's a small introduction, and Rob has spoken to you a lot about that. We've got actually a table of contents. It's created in a Google Doc, and I know we probably could have looked at something a little bit more polished, but actually it just facilitates the contribution really nicely. So we've stuck with the Google document for the moment. So you'll see there, title of the exemplar. We've got 11 headings in total, so you get an overview. This is an extremely comprehensive entry into the OER, but you get an overview of the technology enhanced assessment, an idea of the discipline that was used, or the disciplines that the contributor feels that it might be relevant to, the learning outcomes it could align to, skills, graduate attributes it could align to, which speaks to the DigComp Edu framework, referring back to that. The technologies involved, some practical guidelines and considerations, possible grading criteria, some testimonials, which is fantastic. And then we've invited people as well to link outwards to, you know, something like a student assessment brief you'll see here. So that covers it, institution name, just in case you want to contact the person to have a chat in more detail, and other notes. So people have chosen, Felicity here has chosen to add some resources into her exemplar. So that's it, guys. I'm going to share out the link to the resource into the, I think I've stopped sharing. Just give me 2 secs, pardon me. Go back to the slides. Yeah, it's just left for me to thank you for your attention, and we're available obviously for questions. I think, Orna, we're going to take a quick question here at this point, and then some more questions at the end of the session. But thank you from myself and Rob, and we're delighted to be invited today. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne and Rob. Fantastic resource. I have a question for you just to get the ball rolling. Which is your favorite exemplar? I mean, there's some, I noticed there's some really nice additions since the last time I looked. You've got some really interesting stuff in there. I don't think the podcasting one was there before. Very nice. So you've got a really, you've got a depth of types of assessment, but also a real depth in terms of disciplines as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of our aims of the creating the resource in the first place, because we found that in some disciplines there were plenty of case studies available around technology enhanced assessment, but for others, I think I mentioned earlier already, for the likes of the humanities discipline, we didn't have as many. So that's growing. Still, we're always open to more contributions, but in terms of a recent favorite of mine is, I don't have the number in front of me, but it's an assessment that combines 2 tools. So the Moodle glossary tool and the H5P open source content development tool. So essentially what the exemplar explains is that the Moodle glossary was set up so that students could create and share H5P content, and the glossary was used to collate those. Students commented on the H5P content types. So I thought that was a really nice idea, combining it sounds reasonably complicated, but actually when you break it down, it's a really nice, simple idea and builds a lot of digital skills for the student through that process.
And you've got a lovely bit of peer review going on there too, which is just really nice. And that glossary tool is a great tool, vehicle for that in Moodle. So any other questions at this point? There was one in the Q&A, which I might just put to you as well. So is it specific to Moodle or other tools? From me glancing at it, it seems open to lots of tools. Proctoring doesn't feature, I don't think, does it?
No, it doesn't. Rob, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, no, we don't have any examples of proctoring in the OER document. I won't open the debate on proctoring. We might be here all day, but generally, I mean, as an open education resource and as one that's crowdsourced, the tools are varied. They're not specific to any particular VLE, and that's exactly what we want. We want it to be as diverse as possible, and we want to crowdsource as widely as possible. So, the more open, the better, I think, with this resource.
Absolutely. And I'd say staff really appreciate those examples, because imagining what an assessment can look like, it can be really challenging. So having good examples like that can really help people design some good assessment. And I see Diane coming in there on proctoring. Actually, at the session yesterday, we did start proctoring bashing, so don't be afraid. So that's one of my hobby horses too. So I don't want to explode the chat box now. But thank you, Suzanne and Rob. Really interesting contribution on a super resource. I have to say, I really like it. And maybe if people from this session were interested in contributing to the resource, they could get in touch with you if they had some interesting examples.
We would love that. We would absolutely love that. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Super. Thanks to you both. Now for our next dream team, we have Karen and Tom from Eportfolio Ireland, a fantastic community of practice. And I am completely biased because I am also in this community of practice. So just to introduce them both, Tom is a member of the steering committee of Eportfolio Ireland and a social science lecturer and educational developer at IT Tralee. His research interests are in technology enhanced learning, open education, and ePortfolio. He is editor of the Irish Journal of Technology Enhanced Learning. And Karen Buckley is an assistant professor in the School of Inclusive and Special Education at Dublin City University. Her interests include inclusive pedagogy, inclusive practice, and she's a doctoral candidate in Maynooth University, where she's exploring professional development in higher education. So over to you, Karen and Tom.
Thanks, Orna, and hi everyone. It's great to see you all here. I'm sure you can see my screen, or you might just give me a wee thumbs up. Fantastic. My name is Karen Buckley, and thanks for that warm welcome and introduction, Orna. Delighted to co-present with Tom here today on behalf of Eportfolio Ireland. We're a small network, which includes Lisa Donaldson, the esteemed Orna Farrell, Tom and myself. And maybe just to give you all a little overview of what we do. Eportfolio Ireland is a professional learning network. We are ePortfolio practitioners and researchers, and we're all based in Ireland. There's a bit of a Dublin City University slant, where Orna, Lisa and I are based in Dublin City University. So poor Tom is representing the South, and he does it very, very well with lots of classes, you can imagine. And we were really established, I guess, back in 2017 as Mahara IRL, but we rebranded quite quickly back in 2018 to better represent the broader interests of all members. And again, I suppose this was a decision based on, I suppose, trying to consider all tools that are used for ePortfolio practice as well. So we are a grassroots community. We have a voluntary steering group. We're really quite active in online and face-to-face events, or we used to be more active in face-to-face events. But really our main mission and aims is to support the professional development of all those who teach, and ongoing collaboration between ePortfolio practitioners in higher education institutions. We've also broadened out to further education or adult education institutions here in Ireland. And actually, we're seeing a lot of members in our community who also work in second level education settings as well. So we welcome all, and we're delighted to be able to present to you today on some of the activities that we have. And I suppose I'm maybe going to start a little bit talking about what type of ePortfolio activities we have in DCU. And then we're going to going to pass you over to Tom then, where we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the opportunities that Eportfolio offers to be able to engage with pedagogically robust alternative assessments. And that's really our aim for today. So some of the activities that we do, and I want to maybe draw your attention to our website, which is eportfolioireland.wordpress.com. I have it on screen there. And what you'll see is there's lots in our website about what we do, some of our recent activities, also some really nice free open source resources that are available to you on some of the events that we've held over the past 3 years as well. But really our ultimate aim is to share our understanding of ePortfolio practice in Ireland, to support robust assessment, to support employability skills, and to support good teaching, learning and assessment across all elements of our practice. And we're really lucky that we have, I guess, a great network of ePortfolio enthusiasts with broadened or the variety of different skills and knowledge and competencies with regards to ePortfolio. And even, I guess, within our steering group, we have different levels of expertise with regards to ePortfolio. And that certainly has been, and it's shaped us to be one of a really interesting grassroots membership, because we were able to maybe share practice, we're able to promote ideas, and also be able to connect practitioners with what is happening on the ground as well. It's been really, really interesting to think about how ePortfolio has offered us an alternative assessment that's pedagogically robust. I suppose we in DCU in particular have considerable history with ePortfolio based assessment in particular. ePortfolio has been fairly widely adopted across all faculties, all 5 faculties in DCU, to serve a variety of teaching, learning and assessment purposes. And we see that from an initial launch back in 2017 of our Loop Reflect, as we call it. We have an increase in a number of active accounts of up to about 42% of all users across the university, which equates to about just under 10,000 active accounts in 2019-2020. So it's a really significant and important approach to our, I suppose, teaching, learning and assessment practices here. And we're really trying to support all practitioners to test and to try out ePortfolio as a tool to support teaching and learning. And as I mentioned, that ePortfolio has been fairly widely adapted across our faculties. I suppose in the last 7 or 8 months with COVID-19, it has really proven to be a catalyst for lecturers to embrace ePortfolio-based assessment as an alternative assessment. And this last semester alone, over 60 separate modules here in DCU are using ePortfolio with their students, as the pandemic has required us a rethinking and a reimagining of assessment due to the inability to conduct in-person examinations, and just the way that we are teaching in a more blended or a more hybrid approach. So I'm going to pass you over to my colleague Tom to talk about why ePortfolio is useful and why it can be used as an alternative assessment tool.
Thank you very much, Karen. Absolutely professional and unflappable, which puts me in an awful position because I wing it most of the time like that, and relying on my innate charm and good humour. And apologies, there's a little dog in the background you may hear barking. So that's, I don't have children, small children to put up, and my baby is 25, so that's a slightly different issue. Anyway, I think Karen has really hit the nail on the head in terms of the last year. I think we have been challenged, obviously, with doing a lot of things differently, and sort of paraphrasing David Bowden, when he talks about students can, to varying degrees of success, get away with bad teaching, but bad assessment is very difficult to overcome. So I suppose whether we like it or not, when we talk about education and all that goes with it, a lot of the times, like the end game is the assessment strategy, and we need something that can stand up and be robust. And I think there's a lot of concerns about validity and reliability, and I suppose we would certainly be arguing that ePortfolios certainly provide that opportunity. So I think we would talk about it because we think it's a very good process and very good educationally. But even for those who are more concerned with the reliability and validity, I still think that it would certainly give a much broader aspect and more robust way. And not just, I suppose, if you think like portfolios originally would come from the more art-based subjects. But as one thing we've seen here is there's a whole wide range of academic disciplines there. And as I said, also, if we look at a lot more professions are now moving towards that idea of continual professional development, how do you capture that in a dynamic way? And I suppose e-portfolios in particular, but or the general, but the e-portfolios in particular, because we actually do have that opportunity to move forward. So as I suppose as I said there, just quoting here a couple of quotes here, there are student-centered activity, one in which the student is free to choose what artifacts are included. And I suppose that is one of those major things. It's actually showing. I mean, if you look at sort of the what sort of higher end skills, and we're talking about Bloom's or the revised version, Anderson's taxonomy there, and like at the high end, we're talking about selection and creation, and that's really showing that higher level of skills there. So as I said, it's really putting it back to them, rather than here's a 3,000 word essay, here's the title I'm going to give you. No, I'm actually giving it back to you. That can be quite scary and frightening for people, because a lot of people, we've become so accustomed to, what do I think? What am I to think, sir? So I suppose that's the thing there. And as I said, students, so I suppose it's that idea. I mean, I like that thing about integration, inspiration. It's really giving back that choice, that let's say, for innovative and authentic assessments. And one of the things there, myself and two colleagues in Tralee did some research last year, and it certainly bore out a lot of what we found. I think a lot of people, well, what have you weren't quite sure they were using portfolios, because it's fair enough if you're using PedalPad or PathWriter or Harnett, then you're using a definitive, definite e-portfolio platform. But actually, a lot of people were using the journal facility on their VLE, or some people were using, what they got the students to do was curate 6 videos and write a description on YouTube. That's an e-portfolio, any collection of work where you've had to select and stuff there. So as you can see here, there's a hell of a lot of choices in terms of what constitutes an e-portfolio. The main thing is that it's, as I said, it's innovative and it's authentic, because you're actually in real life, so to speak, to use that awful phrase, that's what you're being asked to choose. Can you do this for next week? Can you come up with a solution? And this is an e-portfolio is a manifest way of saying, this is my work, this is what I chose, and this is what I produced there. So if you look here, as I said, this collection of I mean, one of the things I particularly love about e-portfolios is like the traditional sort of portfolio is just words and just text. But if you think about it, there's so much more. Like one of the projects you said that we've been involved in, it said it's with e-portfolios for nursing students. So even one of the learning outcomes for nursing is that you have to be a health promotion educator. Well, now you can actually, maybe make a Powtoon video or some sort of thing, and then put it into your collection, rather than just writing up, I done this and writing, I done that. That's not to say writing doesn't have its part to play. I think the whole reflective element and sort of teeing it up, because that's also showing the process and how you actually capture that. And as I said, that also then, what I particularly like about portfolios is where you can show that the student has written something, the lecturer can comment on it, and then you feed back. Now that's real learning. That's that real sort of learning. And as I said, the record learning from work placements there, I think, so many degrees now have some element of placement or some element of going out and putting it into practice. So this is a tangible way, because if you think about it, a lot of students, when they come out, from university, yes, they have the degree, but what else have they to show? Because there's lots of people with a degree. So what's going to mark you out? And this is a tangible way. This is not just me sitting at the interview. I can send you a link on. So in advance of the interview, it's already changed and become a far more dynamic process. So there's some examples there, Karen. Are we actually playing the video? This is where they are. We just, so as I said, so this, I think, in terms of actual practical resources, and I'm going to let Karen now come back, and hopefully I haven't made a show of ePortfolio World, because I'm very aware that Orna is also.
Do you know what?
As well.
He calls me unflappable, but Tom, you're an absolute pro, so I won't take any heed of you now anymore. with this unflappable nonsense. It was absolutely perfect, Tom. And I mean, I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head. It is about opening up new opportunities. What are the potential for ePortfolio? We're all having these conversations now about alternative ways of doing. And actually following on from Suzanne and Rob's presentation, I think one of the real beauties about having these conversations like we are in the Eden webinars is about actually trying to share some of our existing resources. And I think Orna's just popped it into the chat there a moment ago, where we have some really nice examples of ePortfolio based assessment in an ebook. It's a free open resource that's available to you. And it really tries to provide real life examples, ways of trying out, whether it's taking small starter steps in ePortfolio practice, or maybe if it's about refining or redefining how you use ePortfolio for assessment in all of your teaching and learning. But there's really some nice ideas. It was a kind of a crowdsourced way that we could disseminate and to share some key practices in ePortfolio that are going on across Irish institutions over the past couple of years. So I think that would be a really nice resource for you to look at and for you to explore. And I think it would complement Suzanne and Rob's recent publication as well. I think they could really be helpful to any new practitioners, or for any of those who want to re-examine or redefine what we want to do moving forward for the next year. I think we will wrap it up, and would love to take any questions that you do have on Eportfolio Ireland. As ever, we will share these slides and any resources that we've mentioned, but please check us out on our website, eportfolioireland.wordpress.com, or follow us on Twitter. We're quite Twitter active, so get in touch with us that way, and would love to answer any questions that you may have. Can
I give a shout out that we hopefully will have a special issue of Irish Journal of Technology Enhanced Learning, which has been guest edited by Eportfolio Ireland. So we're busy putting all that together, and hopefully in the new year we'll have that edition out.
Good. Thanks, Karen and Rob. And I've been setting off the chat a bit there, getting a bit of debate going about which is important, the process or the product. So any thoughts on that to begin with? And there's actually a few more in the Q&A I'll put to you in a second as well. So process or product?
Oh, I mean, I'm a teacher educator. I'm a moonshore by trade, so I have to say the process. I mean, I would be fired on the spot if I said it was all about the product. But ultimately, I mean, and I guess the reason why we're talking about assessment is that it's a huge part of our quality standards. We can't ignore, the end product is a way of measuring our students' performance. But, I think it's a combination of both. It's trying to find that balance is the sweet spot that I think we all find really difficult. I think the beauty of ePortfolio is at least presenting the process to the viewer.
I think particularly for group work, I often have some reservations where you see assessments characterized as, this is about assessing the group dynamic and the group processes. But actually, when you actually look at the how the marks are allocated, you're going to go, no, you've actually done it for the product. Yeah. So I think ePortfolios is a way of genuinely, mapping that process.
Okay, so yeah, that was just me, getting things going.
Stirring the pot.
You probably already, those of you who know me probably already know my answer. I would always reward the process more heavily than the product. So I'd be in the weighting, I would be giving the process 80 or 70 and the product the remaining. Because that's the message you want to give to students, is we reward the effort, we reward the messy learning, not the shiny thing at the end. Because actually where the learning in portfolio, sorry, Tom, where the learning happens in portfolios is the messy bit. Go ahead, Tom.
But the problem is, I suppose, unless you have built a robust assessment system, the easiest thing to assess is the product, because you can see it, you can feel it, you can weigh it, so to speak. And I think that's the thing where something which, to paraphrase another quote, everything that matters we can't always count, and everything that we can count doesn't always matter. And I think sometimes, as I said, unless we are prepared to put in the hard work to find a way of tracking that process, we will end up just, look at the shiny piece of work that you've
exactly finished. And you don't see the blood, sweat, toil and tears that went into the production, to quote Winston Churchill. So lots of interesting comments. I might just pick out one comment actually, which is a nice one. Any advice for someone just starting off with ePortfolio or considering introducing it into with their students?
Start simple. I think that's the thing. Like, there is a temptation to become enamored by the technology. And as I said, like, I'm not saying we shouldn't be raising the bar, but the problem is you might be particularly adept, and I think, you know, going back to certainly now that people are working at a distance, you don't know what broadband capability people have. You don't know what software packages that they have. I mean, I've had students this year who are sharing family laptops, and it might be a 7-year-old laptop. So even relatively, what I think is relatively okay and easy to do. So I think pick something which, and above all else, it's still about the pedagogy. And Karen has said that, and that was what she started off the whole thing. It's still about the pedagogy. You know, can you make this fancy doodly or video scribe video? Maybe you can, but someone else can't. So sorry,
Yeah,
I've
I'd
talked
agree
too
with
much.
that. No, I would agree with that, Tom. I mean, I think one of the key and most important features of a successful ePortfolio implementation actually has to do with time. And I totally take on board the right technology is important, looking at the right tool, that's obviously important, using what you have in your own virtual learning environments or whatever tools are available to you and your students. But actually it's about building in scheduling time, actually, regular, consistent use of engaging in the process of ePortfolio development, both for you and your students, I would think is an important feature and a space to start. You know, for me, I've a range of different ePortfolios, some for my professional practice, some for my studies, my doctoral studies. But also, I mean, think about some of the microblogging tools that you already use. I mean, you know, are you engaged in social media? Do you blog on Twitter? Do you use LinkedIn, for example, as a blogging tool or as a way to kind of capture some of your academic or work achievements? But think about maybe some of the tools that you already have, see what works for you, see what styles of technologies will work, and just put the time into maintaining it and to foster it. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you, Karen and Tom. Some really interesting conversation going on that hopefully we'll come back to in the final Q&A session. So some heated debating going on about assessment, which is brilliant. And just to echo your sentiment there about Karen, about the professional ePortfolio, it doesn't have to be an ePortfolio platform. If you've got a blog or if you've got a Twitter, I totally agree. You know, that is you reflecting and collating your professional development equally as valid. So our final speaker is the fabulous Dr. James Brunton, also from Dublin City University. So there may be a bit of a DCU theme if you haven't picked up on that yet. So James is an assistant professor and chair of the DCU Connected BA in Psychology major, which is an online program based in DCU. So online before COVID, still online now. James is a member of the Digital Learning Research Network. His research interests include the psychology of identity formation, socialization and orientation processes for off-campus online higher education students, online learning design, open pedagogy and digital assessment. And so today he's going to talk about some really nice open pedagogy assessment work he has worked on for the last year or two. James, is it?
Sorry, my unmute button moved. For the last 3 years, I think 17, 18 was the first year that we started doing that. Can you see my screen?
Sure can.
Okay.
Do you want to go full screen there, James? You're just telling Andrea to be quiet.
Here we go. You can see that now, can't you? Great. So yeah, as Orna said, I work in DCU. I work on a DCU Connected program. I've worked on online programs, open access programs since 2010 here. And what I'm talking about today is part of our efforts to bring in more open pedagogy assessment into the program. Also, as Orna already said, so I'm the chair of the psychology major program, and what that means in our kind of model, we have a particular type of online distance learning model where it's a small full-time team who then coordinates with a bigger part-time adjunct faculty team. So we're very much kind of at the cog of this big web, and we're trying to make everything stick together. So as part of that, a lot of the drive for innovation kind of comes from us as sort of program chairs or module coordinators on these programs. And I suppose over the 10 years that I've worked on programs in DCU, I've gone through a series of innovations trying to increase the variety of assessment types in different modules, trying, like, as it's a common theme across the different presentations today, trying to shift the balance from, you know, being more heavily weighted in traditional essay style assignments to having a nice wide variety that feed back into different program learning outcomes. So, you know, how people communicate, how they work together, how they reflect on things, bringing in e-portfolios into some of the modules, you know, and then working with the part-time teams to try and make sure that they are fully, that everybody in the teams is fully on board, and trying to overcome some resistance that some people might have, where they're like, no, we should just have essays or report writing. They should just be writing all the time. Or people trying to get used to, how do we assess this? It's harder to figure out how to assess someone using this rubric for reflection than it was to just correct an essay, which people feel they kind of have in their soul. They know how to assess an essay. So in some of our psychology modules, you know, this process was ongoing, and I suppose I'm seeing things on Twitter, I'm hearing things in events like this. I was especially in some conferences seeing presentations on really interesting ways to approach assessment. And some like OE global conferences and other conferences like that, all the conferences that kind of in this area. And I was seeing people talk about different ways of opening up assessment to get away from this idea of the disposable assignment, that people do their assignments, it gets corrected, they get their feedback, and then we put it in an archive and it's never sees the light of day again. We just put it in the shredder and everyone forgets about it. And I put out the call to my team to see, okay, what can we do? What kind of different ideas, where could we bring in real life examples or real life data sets to use? Where could we get students to make things that could go out in the public? Where might students work in the public or in the public eye? Or where might they produce things that we bring back into the program? You know, how can we get them making stuff that will have a purpose, have a life of its own outside of just being something to be assessed? So Megan Gaffney, who works on a couple of our modules, was the first person to kind of come back to me and say, I love this idea. Let's try that. And so on this developmental and educational psychology module, we started to sit down and look at what could we do differently. So I suppose another thing, this is only one part of trying to be open. We try to be open in lots of different ways. Like the program that I work on, or even the family of programs that it comes from, the humanities programs, they're open access programs. Anyone over the age of 23 who wants to come and study on a high honors level higher education course can get in. So we have open education is kind of built into what we do. We have flexible progression routes, and we're always trying to see within the resources that we have, where can we put in more openness? How can we open it up in different ways? So, and as a quick segue, if you want to look at more of these possibilities, this is a total sidebar. I'm involved in an EU funded project, Open Game, which is eventually trying to make a actual interactive game to help encourage people into open educational practices. But some of the early outputs from that project include a whole a whole handbook of examples of open educational practice. What I'm talking about today is one of them, but there are others on assessment, there's others on teaching, there's all sorts of different ideas in there. So opengame-project.eu if you want to go check that out. So what we did, I'm probably skipping a bit ahead in the slides, but what we did was there was an existing assignment where students thought about how they might promote to a school a certain educational psychology topic. And what Megan saw in my suggestions about, okay, how can we open up assessments was, yeah, she always thought when she saw these assignments, some of these would actually make really good pieces of information to go to schools. Like schools could benefit from some of the work the students were doing, but like it didn't have that function. So that's what we tried to imbue. There's out of 3 assignments during the year, their second assignment, which was focused on developmental psychology, we got them to sort of just do a more regular assignment where they would research a certain topic, like let's say mental health and well-being or something like that from a developmental psychology standpoint. And then in their final one, they would kind of come at that subject or that topic again from a educational psychology standpoint, but actually work that up into either an infographic or a pamphlet, and a digital pamphlet that we would actually put out in the public eye. So this is an example of one of the students' sort of posters. We let them take a couple of different formats: infographic, digital pamphlet, poster. And we then collected these and put them onto a WordPress blog. Now, I think there's different ways we could have done that. Possibly we could have done it better. I know other people were talking about, we could have got them to blog it themselves and then federated or pulled all those into one overarching blog. But I suppose we were conscious of not wanting to ask the students to do too much. So we got them to do it, give their permission, and then those who gave their permission, we put them up on this website. We wanted to follow up, and we are still following up on how this is going. So we did an online focus group after the first year that we did it, and we analyzed it using thematic analysis. And this is sort of the early results from that first year. We have collected data last year as well. Due to 2020 COVID madness, we haven't really gotten to the second year, and we have decided that we want to do it again this year before we kind of really push forward and write it up. But the results were really interesting in that students, they really seem to engage with this as a good idea. They recognize this as something novel, something engaging. They struggled with it a little bit, especially those who were maybe a little less used to making something graphically pleasing. And I suppose the first year you could see vague instructions. The first year maybe we didn't quite get it right. I mean, I think we were figuring out how to release this to the public as the assignment was unfolding the first time. But the huge thing, the thing that I thought was so impactful was it really made them reflect on what they were doing. It made them think about producing an assignment in a different way. Now that it was going to go somewhere, like suddenly there was all these ideas about how do you communicate to people? Like, how does the public get information? At what point do I stop being responsible for this being out in the world? Will someone else take responsibility for this if there's something wrong with it? And it really made them think about all these different topics. I'm not going to talk through these codes, but you'll just see like it gives a flavor of what I was just saying, and it got them thinking about, in their journey, some of them towards being a psychologist or working in fields in psychology, it was, at what point am I good enough? At what point is the information I'm giving out valid? Or, can I stand over it? Or at what point can people get use out of what I'm saying? So yeah, and also who is the public, all this kind of thing, like who are we talking to? So that's it. I suppose what I would say is we're continuing to use this assignment there's a number of other places. We haven't done anything as clear cut in terms of that I could point to and say, look, there's an open pedagogy assignment. But I know that in some of our research methods modules in the psychology major, people are using real life data sets rather than some artificially created data set. I suppose that's another form of open assessment. And we have some other places where I want to keep pushing to see if we can tweak assignments so that what the students produce could be used, can go back into the course as video content or other kind of infographic content. But we're just not, it's not quite there. It's like, it's always about how many innovations can you try and put into each year, given the amount you can actually do. I think that I got my plugin for Open Game and everything. So I think that's the I'll stop sharing.
Thanks, James. Some really interesting stuff there, and I shared the blog there in the chat,
Yeah.
and I was just having a look at some of the examples, and it's very interesting the effect of having to showcase work on students. You know, and how that they had to learn about effective communication and how it had to be polished and well presented. I think that obviously changed their way of doing things.
Yeah, they really, it really made them think about their work in a way that they never had before. You know, and that's what came out in the data collection. That it was just it was fundamentally different. It was a little bit, the only other assignment they compared it to was an organizational psychology assignment where they had to record a video as if they were sort of talking authoritatively on a topic, but that it's with, and then they peer review each other, but that's still closed. And like, that's the assignment, I think there's scope to actually get them to just do a short piece on topics and then actually use some of them in the course. But they thought it was a little bit similar to that, but then it went totally beyond it because they were actually putting it out. They were actually putting it out in the public. The only thing about the blog is we haven't even updated it with last year's work yet, because
of 2020.
2020.
Hashtag.
Yeah, hashtag 2020.
Damn you, 2020. So James, just to draw on some of maybe the background stuff that inspired this, I was just thinking, like Rajif's work, that SciProf on Twitter might be a nice thing to share with the chat. And what's that open cookbook thing they have, which I think again.
Oh, is there an open pedagogy
cookbook or something? Patchbook.
Yeah. That's
so
really,
yeah, you might want
really
to lash them in there, but
yeah.
Certainly Rajif at SciProf on Twitter, if you're interested in open pedagogy or open educational resources, is well worth a follow.
Yeah. And I think like some of the stuff out of that open game project that I was plugging earlier, sometimes I think it can be intimidating if you go to some of the websites that talk about open pedagogy, because open pedagogy is a complex intellectual thing to like come at from that angle. Often it's easier to think about what's going on in classrooms, what's going on between, you know, teachers and students, and what can you change by using some of these open educational practices. And it's often, it might be easier for people to start there and then start to learn how to do that, and then they'll arrive at open pedagogy. You know, it's like if you're using a real life data set, you're doing it. If you're somehow taking something students are doing, if you're getting them to blog and that's kind of public, but you're protecting the students and the students understand what they're doing, that's open pedagogy. You know, rather than sort of looking at something where it's like it's a praxis of like that's very complicated, and some people might go, I don't know what's going on here, I don't like this, it's scary.
It's very theoretically heavy area, but actually when you see like your example there of what you can do, I think it kind of breaks down some of the theory, and they do like to use some heavy language like praxis, which can be a bit daunting. There's a nice question there for you, James, in the chat. I'll put it to you now. Privacy issues around publishing the student work. That's a good one.
So the students did not have to publish it. It's effectively like layer one. It's a closed assignment. They do their work individually, they submit it through Moodle as normal. With that, then they can opt to put a permission with it, that it can be taken and put online. I then take everything that has a permission slip and I give it just a once over to make sure that the student has understood what was going on. I think the first year there was a student who maybe misinterpreted a tiny bit and was putting official government logos on it as if it was a government piece of information. It was like, okay, that cannot go up because that shouldn't be on there. But like, so I just do a once over, and then the stuff was shared online where the student had permission to do that. And I mean, a big thing is to ensure that students understand that. And it's the big part of open pedagogical assessment is you have to protect the students or make sure the students are making an informed decision. You know, if students are blogging or vlogging publicly, they're putting themselves at risk to a certain level depending on who they are and all that. So I think there always has to be a plan B. There always has to be an opt out. And depending on the learning outcomes, that might be more or less problematic. But like, you always have to think about that. You know, certain people might need to not be out there in the public eye or be putting their name on things, or, you know, there can be sensitivities around that stuff. So there always has to be a plan for how you students have a different way of doing things.
Very nice point, James. Sharon has a good point there about how it gives an opportunity to speak about privacy. Also licensing. Did you do Creative Commons licensing on those?
In what I put to the students, I said, you don't have to do this, but if you're giving, what I'm asking you to give the permission for is CC BY. And I try to explain that. And I mean, there's a number of, in asking them to produce something that could be shared publicly, that required, content in their assessment documentation and discussion with the students around what licensing meant, because they then can't take copyrighted images and put them on there, you know, because that's going to create a problem. So it's again, to come back to that open game one, the first output of that was a competency framework where we tried to figure this out. And it is, as soon as you start in on any of these activities, there are underlying competencies where all of a sudden it's like, you do need to know about licensing and copyright and how that works before you can kind of do this. You do need to know how to lead students in knowing about that, you know. So there's always a bit of a matrix of things you end up figuring out. You do need to know about these things, and if you're leading students in doing that, you need to be able to help them get there substantially before you do it.
And you're really hitting some of those skills on that DigComp framework, if you think about it too. So I mean, students are really developing their knowledge of internet safety, licensing, privacy. So you're hitting a whole load of themes there, which is fantastic. So now I think, thanks James for your contribution. Very interesting discussion around open pedagogy. One I'm interested in myself, and one I've swam through the open sea of praxis trying to get my head around, but I think nice to see a good practical example. So I think now we have time for a bit more questions to the panel. So, you know, put your questions in the chat or the Q&A box for anyone of the panel. We might take a look back at some of the previous discussion around assessment to start us off as well.
I will jump right in, Orna.
Do it, Vlad.
So I'm, for everyone here, I'm the diversity here. You can figure from my name and from my lack of accent, I'm not Irish. So I saw a question in the Q&A, and this got me thinking. We have this discussion with other colleagues about new ways of assessing students, and then they say, okay, but this works for a small group of students. What about scaling? And I saw a question in the Q&A in relation to scaling for e-portfolios, but I would extend this question about scaling for various types of assessment activities. What are the assessment activities that cannot be scaled if that's the case, and how you should work as a teacher to better do the scaling thing for the assessment? This is a question for all the panelists.
Can I just respond? I think one of the things is that some of the courses I'm familiar with, would have large numbers. Like students would have maybe, well, for our college, it would be have 90 students in a year, which is quite a big year. That's a lot of portfolios. I suppose one to do is to scale up is to have a team of assessors. The only problem, I suppose, is inter-rater reliability. I suppose that's one of the things that you do need to have a really robust rubric and a robust interpretation of that rubric, because I think rubrics, I think sometimes we throw them out as some sort of panacea. They're, you know, we need to have a good collective idea, and I suppose the thing is, particularly the more complex, I suppose, the more moving parts, say we're in a portfolio. I think that's one of the issues. So scalability could be an issue, and as I said, but I think it's too much for one person. So rubrics and training to get everybody to sort of have a good sense of what it is. That'd be my thoughts about scalability.
Just to jump in there as well, and to invite my colleagues Rob and Suzanne to join in on this suggestion as well. We're in the middle of conducting some research on the swift move of moving a very large class, or a number of very large classes, online since March 2020 here in Dublin City University. And I suppose in that project we surveyed staff and students, particularly those in large classes, and we define large classes of anything over 100 students. And actually we came up with some really clear immediate actions and considerations to take into account. I suppose to answer your question, Vlad, about scalability, what considerations need to be made, I think ultimately what it comes down to is the principles for good, robust, effective assessment need to be maintained. If we are quite clear on exactly what are the principles that support our learning outcomes, we can scale quite effectively. But as Tom said, it's about tooling up, it's about getting the support that we need, and to do that effectively. And if I may just share my screen very quickly, I'm going to actually share with you some quick guidance that we have just published as kind of an interim report. And here with our moving large face-to-face classes online, we have some guidance here for HE teachers, higher education teachers. And I suppose that was contributed to by the data we collected from staff and students here in DCU, but also informed by literature on large class teaching and learning and current publications on the swift pivot for COVID-19. So there's some immediate actions and considerations to take into account for assessment, and then some ongoing actions and tips and techniques. So we will pop that in the chat box for you as well. Might be useful.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, that's a lovely resource as well. Go ahead and put it in the chat. I think I put nearly all the resources in the chat that have been shared, and I think that James, if you share your slides as well, I think everything has been shared already, and it will go up on the Eden website later as well, along with the recording. So if you've missed anything, you can get it there. There's a couple more questions coming in, unless anyone wants to else, James or Suzanne or Rob want to come in about the scaling question.
I would just say it again, it's complicated. It depends on your teaching and learning model, and it depends on sort of the learning design approach in the modules. You know, if you have a way of, you know, layering on extra supports where you need them, then, you know, it's easier to scale to bigger classes. I mean, it's the same with any assessment. We often have this discussion because, you know, our adjunct faculty are part-time, so you can't just design the best assignment ever that requires an academic to be, you know, working with the students 24/7 for 4 months or something. You know, it's just that's not doable, that's not scalable. So you have to figure out what is practical, where can the work be put reasonably and on the students, with them being supported to do that work, you know, and to get a good outcome. So it depends on a lot of variables, but you can kind of see how something might be too complicated or not scalable enough. But in that case, you might want to start small and have like a 2-3 year plan. In year 1, we'll get them doing, you know, we'll get them working in groups. In year 2, we'll get them working in groups, but they share their work publicly. In year 3, we'll get some help and we'll actually have them do it right in Wikipedia or something, you know. So you have to move that way slowly. I mean, I want to get students working in Wikipedia somehow, but it scares me still a little bit.
Me too, James.
You know, yeah, and it's just you know, baby steps, and then, you know,
I'm nearly ready for the year 3 with one of my Wikipedia assignments. I have them building wikis in Moodle, and the next phase is to go into Wikipedia. So yeah, I think your point there about doing it in phases, you know, is a good one, because change is hard. And it takes a lot of time and energy to think about how to do things, how to design new things, how to show the students new things. So I think, yeah, break it into baby steps, add a layer each time you do it, makes perfect sense. And obviously the scale thing with Eportfolio in particular, give the students very, very specific limits. Tell them, I want 500 words and 3 images and no more. Because portfolios in particular can just go mental. People can just throw the world and its wife in there. And also, I always say, I don't want to see a picture in here unless it's relevant, you know. But I do enjoy the odd cat picture or dog picture. You know, they're always relevant.
Orna, I might just on that point there,
yeah, go ahead, Rob.
Of taking things in phases and so on. I think an important thing to consider as well is involving students in the assessment process. In DCU, one of the projects we're involved in at the moment is students as partners in assessment, looking at ways that we can bring students into the assessment process as well and give them a bit of agency. And this can really help with scale if you start looking at ways students can self-assess and peer assess and provide constructive feedback and support one another in the assessment process. That can create some efficiencies for staff in terms of grading and management because you're getting students involved, but it's also fantastic for the learner's own agency and their own ownership of the assessment process. It can help them learn, it can help them feel involved and give them a voice as well. So I'd be a strong advocate for partnering with students and involving them in the assessment. I think it's good for a lot of things, including scale. We'll have a forthcoming resource available on that in the next few weeks. So be sure to keep an eye out for that on our website.
Thanks, Rob. And Sharon, I think, may have shared a version of that, or is that an early version Sharon has shared there of the assessment? And
that was that was something similar. Yes, that's from the EDTL project. Yeah, that's another excellent suite. I
just put up a link.
Go ahead,
there.
Tom.
The University of Edinburgh has a Wikimedian in residence, and there's some great projects coming out of what they're doing in the University of Edinburgh there. So I've certainly come around to, I think, the whole idea of the co-creation Wikipedia. Done actually talk about Sharon Flynn there, done a great session that she hosted a few years ago in NUIG. Shout out.
Nice shout out there, Tom. Wikimedia Ireland, Sharon, I'll have to pick your brain. There's a lovely project I like talking about co-creation on Wikipedia called Women in Red, because like 70% of the entries on Wikipedia are about men, and so to redress the balance is this great project. So that's my idea, is to go get the students to try and rebalance the red. Suzanne, I think you want to come in and answer the question there on the Q&A. So examples of art, music, performance, composition, any examples of ePortfolios?
Yeah, actually in the Faculty of Education, we have a group of users who have engaged with ePortfolios as part of an assessment, and they're actually on my list to contribute to our open education resource. What I might do is just contact them and try and encourage them to add it in. They were open to it, but I just need to follow up on that. So that would be an example that would go into our open education resource. And just in terms of scaling as well, Orna, while I'm here, one of our assessments on the BEd program, the Bachelor in Education program, which is 450 students, they use an ePortfolio assessment. And again, in terms of scaling, like Tom mentioned already, they have a team of assessors, and those assessors use a combination of rubrics, but the interpretation of the rubrics is a very important piece of that assessment process. So it is possible, but yes, needs some careful planning.
And time and resources is and manpower or woman power, as you say. Vlad, come on in. I think you have a question there.
Yeah, sure. Actually, Rob raised the ball for me with the discussion about involving students in the assessment process. And I wanted to quickly ask our panelists, what's their perspective about involving students in the assessment process, and also in the decision about the type of assessment that we should use. So should we involve students in the process of assessing, and should we ask them how they would like to be assessed? Something like this is my question, because I know that we have also students here with us.
Yeah, can I come in on that? Vlad, thanks for that question. We had at our teaching and learning day last year at DCU, we had a student panel who spoke about flexible assessment, and a really important point that has stayed with me from that student panel was that yes, they embrace the choice available when choice is offered around assessment, but that too much choice, there's a balance there, that too much choice is actually overwhelming, and that a certain level of choice is very much seen as a positive by students. And I'd be really interested to hear a student point of view today. So I think we need to kind of consider that balance of, yes, definitely offering choice, but not to get to the point of being overwhelming, because it's just, it will just kind of tip that balance of the flexibility offered if we go too far.
And on that as well, Suzanne, I know earlier on in the week, Sharon Flynn here coordinated a webinar with various student interns from the EODLW project who were all giving their perspective on assessment, and I'll pop the link in the chat to the recording when I can find it. But very much a lot of that was coming up, as Suzanne was saying. Students do want choice, but there needs to be some structure on it. They do want creative and engaging assessments because they enjoy that more, and they do want maybe some kind of practical scaffolding and practical support around managing and tackling assessments and things like that. And anytime we speak to our student intern about issues around assessment, it is so illuminating to get their insight around how they're getting on and what they're finding difficult and what support they need from us. So I think the more we can talk to students and listen to them and take on board their advice and get them involved in processes, it's a win-win situation, because it's good for us and it's good for them.
That's inspiring there, Rob, I have to say. But I totally agree. There was one very interesting thing there in the chat, and Karen, I think I liked how you said a bounded choice. So, a choice with some limits on it, but I totally agree. Too much choice is overwhelming. So it's that delicate balance.
Well, there's nothing worse than feeling like you're out at sea. And I mean, I know as teaching staff, I mean, we often feel that quite a lot, but I mean, our students know, when choice is presented to them, it needs to be structured, it needs to be bounded, and it needs to be sensible. I mean, providing a choice of assessment, whether it's the type of assessment or mode of assessment, or even something like giving our students the opportunities to choose their own groups or to choose their deadline for submission of assessment, unless we bound that and we structure that in a reasonable way, it can actually become very unmanageable for our students. So there's just small considerations that we need to do to ensure that while choice is offered and freedom and flexibility is offered, it needs to be met with a little bit of structure and a little bit of organization from our end to ensure that we have the best outcomes for our students.
I think that's a point that goes across a lot of kind of trying to open up things. Sometimes you have to make sure that still seems structured. It's already been said, but if it's too much, just like, let's explore this together, like students just feel like they're adrift and they don't know what to do, and they don't know, and maybe it could back to that thing of, often I think we forget what it's like to be, let's say, an early undergraduate, and it's like, you seriously need to tell me what's happening here, because right now I just feel like you're telling me to go figure it out myself entirely. They need that structure. Absolutely.
Please tell me what to do. There was one thing in the chat there which I thought was very interesting from Naveen. Consider using ipsative grading. So that's comparing two things and deciding which one you prefer. I've never come across that for ePortfolio, but I think it could be very interesting. Because then you have your idea of what's quality, and then you compare. Does anyone want to come in about IPSAT assessment or IPSAT evaluation there? Or not?
I had to look it up.
I googled it as well, Tom.
I googled it as well, so I actually used Wikipedia to look it up.
On the example of the music portfolio, I have an exemplar here from a student I might show quickly. So from DCU, so the student is given permission to share this, okay, so don't worry, I'm not breaking rules there. So here's our ePortfolio platform here, Loop Reflect, and one thing one of our colleagues, Lisa Donaldson, does is provide a lot of exemplars of student work, because obviously for both the teaching point of view, but also from the student point of view, seeing what it actually looks like really helps. So there's a nice one here. I can put this example in the chat as well from a music specialism. And you can have a look through it. But what I like about it is, okay, there's a picture of her class, which is nice in itself. So she's learning about this particular methodology, the Kodalai method. And you can see she's linked it to her own development. She's a video of herself using some of the methodology. She then puts it into practice in her teaching practice, and you can see she's got further evidence of it. So I think it's a lovely example of an ePortfolio, but also a lovely example of a music one. So I'm just going to share that now into the chat if people would like to. So we're kind of coming to the end of our session. I really like to thank everyone for their contributions. You've been a hugely engaging group. I'm just going to hand over to me partner in crime, Vlad, to conclude.
Thank you, Orna. Well, I don't have much to conclude, because this is still a very open and flowing subject for me. And I think for all of us, because we still don't have the exact answers and the correct answers, and we still need to do a lot of work. But I hope that for everyone here today, a lot of good examples were shown, and you can put them into good use and then come back to us and tell us how it went. Thank you, everyone, for being here during this webinar. And don't forget, Eden is still having until next Monday a lot of interesting webinars. Thank you for all panelists and for all the attendees, and I wish you a very nice day.
Thanks, Vlad. And I think if you're interested in attending the next Eden session, which is on this afternoon, it's called The Next Normal, including student views at 5 o'clock Central European. So the details on the Eden website. Well done, guys.
Thanks, Orna. Thanks, Vlad.
Thank you.
Thanks, Orna. Vlad.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Brilliant session.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it. Great conversation.
Yeah. Moved along at a nice pace, and
Yeah.
it's grand. So
All good.
I
Thanks
hope
very much, guys.
I hope I was speaking English for the whole time.
Absolutely. It was great.
Yeah.